Okay. Okay. I think y'all can probably hear me. Okay. Let's see. Testing audio, testing audio. Should be able to hear me. I am streaming with my title screen there, so you guys should be able to be fine here. All right, well, you know how this goes with the live streams. Oh, audio, good, thank you. All right, here we go. Well, you know I can't start without my intro, so forgive me if you're tired of this, but here it goes. Oh boy. You know, I just changed this intro about a year ago, and I think I might change it again this winter. I don't know. You see it, you guys might see it a couple times, a dozen times a year. I see it hundreds of times a year because of video editing and inserting intros into clips and stuff like that. It's tiring. All right, that was it. Let's transition out of here. And hey, everyone. Welcome to Sunday morning live stream. Figured it was probably a good time. Welcome, first of all. I got my coffee here. I got my microphone right here. I'm in my garage, and hope you guys can hear me just fine. The topic of today, which is long overdue, quite honestly, right, is another overview of my brewing recipe spreadsheet, right? Some of you might be new to my channel. I may never even heard that I had this. But I've had this posted on my YouTube channel. Well, I've been on for about 8 years now, so probably 8 years or so. And I've been making enhancements to it, improvements to it over the years. The last video I did on this, I think, was for version 3.0, which was the major upgrade from 2.0. And that was a good long while ago. So I think it was time to come back, circle around, and for those who are new to the channel, new to the spreadsheet, or curious about it, or who have been using it and have questions, which is why we're doing a live stream for the Q&A part of this. So I probably have a whole mixture of people on the channel here, on the live stream. I mean, to ask a lot of questions, from the newbie to those who have specific detailed questions. So how to handle this, I'm going to kind of ad-lib it. I'm thinking about going into a short introduction as to what it is and what it can do, okay? And maybe some of the highlights from since version 3 came out. We can go over a couple of those really quick, and then of course dive into a recipe, the process of how to design a recipe using my spreadsheet. So I hope that's okay with you guys, and then we can get into the detailed Q&A. You can ask questions all along as well. I may not answer them right away because I don't want to lose my train of thought while I'm walking through this, but we'll do some back and forth here, and I hope it's worth your time, all right? So let me see what's in the comments briefly here. Make sure people are getting on. Good audio. Thanks, Rick. Thank you, Crazy 80 Baby. Crazy 80 Baby, that's funny. Let's see, love my intro. Okay, all right, thank you so much. All right, we got a variety of people here all ready to go. Okay, so let's get into this, okay? I'm going to switch my screen over to the spreadsheet, right? So for those who have not seen this, this is a spreadsheet that I author in Excel, and it's compatible with, at least from a consumption point of view, with other viewers. I mean, I tend to author my recipes in Excel because that's how this spreadsheet was natively designed in, and it's most compatible with. But I also use my iPad, my iPhone, tablets and things out in my garage here on Brew Day with a copy that I can actually walk through and look at. Editing in that format has been kind of a challenge because of apps like the Apple Numbers or the Google Sheets, or even LibreOffice now, which works a lot better with some of the newer versions. That's one of the enhancements I made since version 3. It's much more compatible with Linux or the LibreOffice suite. I did discover a bug though here while preparing for the presentation here, which I can talk about, and maybe a source of some confusion for you, because I didn't even know that this limitation was there until I tried to do this natively in Linux, which is what I'm on right now. This computer that I'm on is a home-built PC made from scrap parts that I've had over the years and made it into a Ubuntu Linux desktop. And that's what you're looking on, camera, everything here, right? So what I have here is I'm remote desktoped into my Windows 10 machine with Excel shown. So you might see the border around here saying quick connect and some other side panel bar options. That is the remote desktop client. I tried to do this natively in Libre, but like I said, I had an issue or two that I couldn't work around in time. I have to find some fix for it, because I actually do kind of like working out here in my garage in Linux. I can be left alone to think, not a lot of kids and distractions and things in the house to like derail my work, right? So anyway, but I got some more comments here. All right, good. Yeah, all right, cool. So for those who are new to this, I wrote this spreadsheet probably in the early 2000s, and for myself, obviously, because I didn't have a YouTube channel back then. It was just for myself. Back in those days, there really weren't any real. There was one, maybe two home brewing related brewing programs out there at the time, and they were limited in what they can do. They were you could only use them on the computer they were installed on, and there was a lot of reasons why I decided to go down the road myself to design my own. And one of them was because I like to learn the process. I wanted to know because I'm an engineer as well, and I'm familiar with Excel. I'm familiar with science and math and things, right? So I actually wanted to see if I wanted to understand the process, not just punching numbers and get answers. I want to know how those calculations are done, because if you're in a pinch on brew day and you need to make a quick adjustment to something, or sort of like to know how things work, it's good to know, because then you understand the process, what variables impact the results, and how to adjust them as necessary. And that's a big part of the recipe design process too, to understand how some of these ingredients and variables impact the outcomes you get. So, all right. So, starting off, is if you've opened this before, you'll notice it might default to the recipe sheet here. Now, this recipe sheet, if I zoom out, I had it zoomed in for the moment. This recipe sheet is what I would typically print if I didn't have a computer in my garage. I would design the recipe in the spreadsheet wherever I had Excel or wherever you wanted to work on this, and then I would print it out to a hard copy, bring it out here, and I would go ahead and write down all the values in the blanks. Then I'd go in the house, and then I would enter it into my Excel thing, right? But now I have a computer out here. I have a connection on my home network. I can actually work directly on the spreadsheet now. So this is what I do today. But the original intent of the recipe sheet was to be able to print it out. It was your brew day sheet, really, and your shopping list as well, because the list of the grains, the hops, and everything on here. So to how to use this, if you're new to this, I have a instructions tab right to the left side. At the very top, it says how to use this template. I have a recipe template playlist on YouTube, which this will be added to later. And it'll walk you some old videos. Some of it may be out of date, but there's a lot of good tidbits of information in those older videos as well. Instructions how to download it. I have it on my website, BEER-N-BBQ by Larry.com. There's a tools and calculators link and a download section there. There's probably links in just about every beer recipe video I've ever done, but those links are to versions of spreadsheets older than the latest. If you want the latest version, always go to the one on my website. Okay, and then I have a whole bunch of version history changes down here. All right, so I mentioned version 3.0 was done January of 2019. That's over a year and a half ago, right? I haven't done a video on this spreadsheet since, but I added a whole lot of new enhancements to it, and I made some point versions, adding some more ingredients and things. I rewrote some formulas, found some bugs, thanks to some of your feedback. You guys especially those on the metric system. I use the U.S. customary units here in the U.S., right? And I don't really test and debug a lot on the metric side. So if you find problems, thanks for pointing them out to me. And I added some more enhancements along the way that we can go over later. Okay, I got some comments here. What can I hit my gravities? Well, hey, let's see if this will help your problem, because if you use my spreadsheet right and dial things in on the Brewhouse tab, which I'll cover, and you measure your losses along the way and your boil off rates, for example, and your dead spaces, you will hit your numbers. I do with the spreadsheet all the time, unless I'm doing a new recipe or brewing on a new system, like I've been doing a lot. You might have seen me doing stuff on the Spike Solo, and now the Blickman Brew Easy, the Grainfather, my homegrown system, right? Each of them has their own nuances, their own efficiencies, their own dead spaces, and you have to dial all those in to get your gravities right. And this is what, and this is why I made the spreadsheet, to do that very thing. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so going into the recipe spreadsheet, just as a quick summary, what you're looking at here is what I just last did. I made a Munich Dunkel about 3 weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago. Chad and I, you may have seen my Brew Easy video I posted last. That was the recipe I made in there. I'm going to share this recipe in the near future when I do my video on it. In fact, on the sidebar next weekend, my birthday, next Saturday, I am throwing an Oktoberfest party here at my house. No, you're not invited. I don't have that much room, but I am serving all 10 gallons of my Munich Dunkel there, and I'm going to serve some German foods and stuff that I cook, right? It's going to be awesome, but anyways, sidebar. So what you see here in the upper left is a grain bill, which is your malted grains and sugars that you would add in here, listing the quantities and the percentage of the grain bill. Because a lot of recipes, if they're done right, will show you the ratios or percentages of the grains, so you can scale and up or down the recipe to fit your needs. You can do it with the raw weights too, but it's just easier with the percentages. Also on the bottom, you have a hops bill and schedule. So these are the hops that you'll add in there, the type of hops, the alpha acids, how much. And I added an AAU column in here at some point, which is a alpha acid unit column, which is basically the alpha units, the alpha acids times the weight. And they give you like a raw number. So if you're going to the homebrew store and you're looking for 3.1 alpha acid Tettnanger hops, but they only have like 2.5, well, as long as you can do the math really quick and come up with 12.4 AAUs, you know that you have the right number of hops. You might have to buy more hops, right? And how much is how you can figure that out. And then their boil times. All right. Let's see. So, thank you. Thanks for the comment, guys. Happy birthday. Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks, Rob. Birakoy, thank you, guys. Man, great comments, great stuff. Let's see. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you believe I'm in my upper 40s already? The end time flies. Okay. So anyway, back to the recipe. In the top center here, I have the recipe outputs. So by design, this column J will be the as design recipe as you designed it. So I expect an extract efficiency of 70%. Let's say I predict a pre-boil gravity of 1.045, et cetera, and I have a column for the actual. So as you go over to the actual column on the parameters on the right side and you fill in all your values on brew day, and during fermentation and everything, it'll fill all these values in with your real values for your batch compared to the intended value. And then since I think in version 3 point something, I added the BJCP guidelines in here. Oh, well, look at that. I got a super chat from, oh man, thanks, Mike. Sweet, man. That's my birthday gift. I love it. $4.99 from Mike over at Everyday Barbecue. Go check him out, man. He doesn't live too far from me. Mike, he lives actually less than an hour from me, just up the highway. And he's been here for some videos. We've done some video collabs in the past. You may have seen them about my new Kamado that I got about a year and a half ago. You guys might remember his face. So thanks a lot, Mike. Much appreciated. Go check out his channel if you're into food. He's got some good stuff there. All right. So going back to the recipe. So we have these BJCP guidelines I added in there. So and we'll walk through the design and I'll show you what happens if you exceed the ranges. The actual design columns will get flagged in bold saying that they're out of range. Not as fancy as Beersmith or anything like that with the bars and the colored things, but it's an enhancement. This is just a spreadsheet, and it's a free spreadsheet, right? I'm not. This isn't my life. This isn't my lifestyle. I don't make any money on this. So that the fact that I'm adding these in here, when I can get time to do it, it's a lot of time and effort to do. It costs me a lot of personal time to go through and debug and track down things, and I do it for the love of it, and I'm willing to share it with you guys. But as far as turning it into a real program, I have a day job. I have a real day job, so this is a hobby for me. Spreadsheets. I like spreadsheets because I can see the recipes. I can see the formulas in them. I can follow the logic, and that's just my nature. I must know how things work, right? Let me go take a look over here. So those are outputs, and then we get into water information. That's something I think I added since version 3 came out as well. So you can enter your water information, and there's some tabs back here that will go through for water to adjust your water to the style of water that you want for your for your beer, and then the water additions required. So for example, I had a mash addition of gypsum and calcium chloride for this because my water was a little soft for the style of beer I was making. The yeast information, the carbonation. So if you want a certain PSI or a certain amount of carbonation in your beer at a certain temperature, it'll tell you what to set your regulator to. And the whole right side is just a whole column full of operations that you start from the top, where you get the total number of water required. In column U, you go all the way down, and it gives you all the parameters from water additions to temperatures to expected gravities. And on column V is where you enter in your actual measured values throughout the day. And by doing that, like I said earlier, you'll get some calculations done here for you, all the way down to the keg, actually, down to your target batch size, which in my definition in this spreadsheet, batch size is how much finished beer you have in your bottles and kegs. Because why would you care about any other value? You want to know how much water and grain will it take for me to get 5 gallons of beer, not 4.5, not 4 gallons of beer. I want 5 gallons of beer in my 5-gallon keg. So that's how my spreadsheet works. I work backwards in that regard. I start with what I want packaged, and I work backwards in the spreadsheet to build up how much water and grain you need to get down to that. And a lot of other recipe calculators never did that. You start from the other way around. You just start throwing in water and grains in, and you get a target batch size as a result. I don't want that to be my result. I want it to be my input. So let me take a look at some comments briefly here. Make sure I don't see anything. Come out for a brew day, Biracoy, no cameras. Now that's a rule here. I've had some people here, some of you may know, from the homebrewing community, can't name names, Clay. They come out and they hang out and they don't like the cameras. So we don't do cameras, but that's a possibility. But a lot of you guys want cameras because you guys want to see what I'm doing. So it's kind of a balancing act, all right? So, all right. You want me to come out there to do brew day? Okay, we'll talk about that some other time. Road trip, right? Okay, so back to the spreadsheet. So down at the bottom, I have a column area where you can add extra ingredients that you may add that don't fit into any other column. One example is my wit beers. Well, I'll put orange peel and coriander in here, or Warflock tablets and things like that. You can down here I give a notes area where you can just enter any note you want. It's just an open text field. You can add extra instructions to the recipe. You can add tasting notes here. That's what I do a lot. I'll add tasting notes in here as well, so I know if I come back to the recipe, maybe I'll give myself some future suggestions to change it next time so I don't forget, right? Those kind of things. All right, so that's the crash course on the recipe spreadsheet tab. Now, to get to this is a whole backstory, which is why you're all here today, recipe design, right? So all the tabs to the right, all the way down to the right, all the way down to the end, are all in support of coming up with information on this spreadsheet. So let's say we get into a recipe, shall we? Let's start doing one. First thing I need to do is clear out some fields here because I want to. Okay. Now here's a tip, right? I've had questions, Larry. I don't like your pre-populated spreadsheets. Why can't I just get a blank template? Well, I'm doing it right here in front of you. You open up the existing spreadsheet, and you go in here and you blow away all the fields. You just blank them out. I don't want. Hold on here. I don't have an option for a. That's interesting. I thought I had a way to make this blank. That's interesting. Oh, there we go. I just highlight the cell and hit delete. Duh, right? I can go through here and I blank out all the actual. Everything in yellow you can blank out. Yellow are user input fields. Anything that's not yellow is a calculated field. Just keep that in mind. So I already went ahead and blew away all my actual inputs from my brew day. I'm going to leave, the first carbonation, I can take that out of there too, right? I can get rid of my water profile, which I'm not going to because I'm using the water that I have. It's fine, but you can blank that out as well. You can blank out the brew date. You can blank out the brewer name. You can blank out the beer style, something I didn't mention. So now the beer style, I have all the BJCP guidelines in here for the categories. So you pick a category and it'll change the BJCP guidelines fields over here to match the style that you've picked. So it'll input all that in here for you. So if I want to do a wit beer, it'll change it to that. If I wanted to do a Belgian Pale Ale, it'll change them this way. But for now, I'm just going to see if I can blank it out. Okay, I'm going to go to the Brewhouse Setup tab. That's right. And let's say I want to. Okay, I'm drawing a blank here. Just give me a second to get some coffee. Okay, so the Brewhouse Setup tab. This is where you make the magic work to converge on your gravities and your recipe designs. If you do everything right in the Brewhouse Setup tab, and the grain lists and things we'll cover later here are also accurate, you will get results that are accurate. You will hit your numbers, and I do that quite regularly. As long as I stay on the same brew system repeatedly, I get really good numbers. If I jump between brew systems, then I have to go back into the Brewhouse Setup tab here and enter new values per each system that I'm going to brew on. So if you're a single system brewer, this is easy peasy. You do this one time, you save this off as a template on your computer, you save it as a template file, make it read only if you want so you don't mess anything up, and then each time you make a recipe, you make a copy of that and you save it to a new file name, and that's your brewing log. And then over time you have this whole long brewing log archive of past recipes you've done in a folder on your computer, which I think is really useful to go back and check on things in the past and kind of get a trend. How often are you hitting your numbers and what's going on and things like that over time. So that's great. Where can you download the template? It's on my website at BEER-N-BBQ.com. Or you can get a older version of it in any beer video I've ever made. If you haven't noticed yet, every time I do a beer recipe video, in the video description is a link to that recipe on one version of this spreadsheet. Probably an older version by now, right? Because I've been doing this for 8 years or more. 8 years, I guess. So if you want the latest version, always check my website. Go to Tools and Calculators and download it there. Okay, so going back here again. So these are all the parameters that you'll want to add. Starting at the top, you choose your units, right? So I'm in the US. I always stick with the US customary units. But if you choose metric, it'll change all the inputs to metric, right? Now, it doesn't change your values to metric. Remember, this is a spreadsheet. Input cells or input cells. You can't automate that without, I don't think you can automate it at all, but if you can, it runs against the grain of what a spreadsheet is, right? You input values. So if you're going to go from US customary, which you can see there's English units down here, US customary units, you can change the metric. It changes the units to liters and kilograms and Celsius, but the values don't change. So keep that in mind. You have to make those changes yourself. But for the sake of the tutorial, I'm going to stay in US customary because that's what I'm most familiar with and what I brew my recipes in. So something new I've added in version 3.5 or 6, I added some more accurate values for estimating water volumes. Now, for those who don't know, water or any liquid expands and contracts with temperature, right? And water is no exception, beer is no exception. So in the past, I don't think I did a good job in my spreadsheet of accurately accounting for the shrinkage factor and when you measure at what point do you measure? So you fill up a kettle full of cold water, you take a volume measurement, you heat it up to a boil. It's not, now the volume is greater already. So what measurement did you put into the field? The one when it was cold or the one when it was hot and ready to boil? See, so there's some ambiguities in my old spreadsheets that still bothered me for a while. So I went in here and put in some overridable parameters that you can come in here and override. Unfortunately, with water, it's a non-linear change with temperature, so I kind of got a slope and average, and I kind of went with that as sort of like an easy peasy fudge factor without having to get into like calculus and things or whatever to figure this stuff out. So if those values that I have here don't work for your measurements, you can tweak them to your heart's delight. That's one of the enhancements I made. Okay, but these should be okay out of the box. Just give them a try. If you don't like them, you can always tweak them later. Now I divided this Brewhouse tab into separate areas. I have a process parameters area, an equipment parameters area, and the actual calculations that you can double check, which was a big reason what I did here as well, right? As I was designing the spreadsheet, I was doing all these inputs and doing formulas down here, and all these values get mapped back to values on the recipe sheet, right? So I initially did this as a check against my own math. But truth is, this is very useful as you design stuff too, to check your math and check my math as well. Make sure things are all nice and kosher. But starting from the top again, so process parameters, right? What's your target batch size? And again, batch size to me is the final packaged beer, not into the fermenter, not at the bottom of the kettle, the final packaged beer. So for me, that's 5 gallons, which is 40 quarts, right? I want exactly 5 gallons of finished beer in a 5-gallon keg. The ambient grain temperature, this one is useful for if you're doing batch sparging, because in a cooler system like my DIY system, because you have to heat the strike water roughly 10 to 12 or more degrees hotter than your desired mash temperature, because the grains will cool down that water and it will stabilize at a temperature hopefully in your desired range of 150 something degrees usually, right? This helps get you to that number accurately, and this works great. So what I do is that I measure my crushed grains in a bucket right before brew day. I'll stick a thermometer down in there and I'll probe it out and I'll write down that value here, and that will help with calculations later. If you're doing brew in the bag or anything where you're throwing everything in, or if you're heating the mash vessel from scratch and not using a cooler system, this value is not important. But for those who use the DIY cooler systems, this is a critical number. Your desired mash temperature, obviously, is self-explanatory. For those who are new to brewing, this is not a beginner's tutorial. Hopefully, if you can understand, I'm trying to get through how to use my spreadsheet with design recipes, so I can probably do a back to basics video again on that for that crowd. I'm just trying to get through this here for everyone's general interest, but there are some general ranges. So you'll notice on some of my fields, if you pick them, you'll get a suggestion about mash temperature ranges. In this case, and some examples. So you'll notice that on certain fields, like I'll go down to the water grist ratio. They'll give you some suggested values, and there's some descriptions over here that might help you figure out what the values are for. And off to the far right, it's a free form area where you can take your own notes, like I've done here for my own personal self, that you can add and remove and tweak and do whatever you want to them. All right. So all right. So going back to the parameters, you can walk down through here and go through them all one at a time. Water to grist ratio, that may not matter for no sparge systems or brew in the bag where you just dump all the water in. But if you do care about grist ratios, here's where you'd enter that. Your estimated grain absorption ratio, which I think I'm going to adjust downward going forward. 0.5 quarts per pound is how much water you expect the grains to absorb and not give up again. So you're going to lose some water, so you have to make up for that by adding more water, right, to your vessel. And this, I think this value is a little high now. After I have a long history of doing brewing on here. It's on some batches of brews, it's been low as like 0.3 something. Of course, I've seen some batches where it was higher than 0.5. So this value is sensitive not to just, well, it is sensitive to the grains they use. So each recipe, if it's got a large percentage of a certain type of grain, you got to be aware historically if that grain is going to absorb more or less water than maybe a different type of grain. Anyway, moving on. Oh, you're very welcome, Rob. Yeah, I'm just trying to be part of the community here. Thanks. Mash time, how long do you expect to mash it? This is not that important, but it is important for brewing, but for my spreadsheet, not so important. Extract efficiency, this one is critical. Now here's the biggest fudge factor, not fudge factor, you can actually zero this in with a history of brews that you can average out and determine, but this extract efficiency is the value that will determine how close you get. One of the major values, there's a few more here that we'll go over, but one of the major values is to how to zero in on your gravities, and to get this right is critical. Now, if you're new and never brewed before, there's some suggestions here. If you're doing batch sparging, somewhere in this range, fly sparging, these could, some of you might have better results, right? Less results. This is just some starting suggested values. If you are doing anything for the first time, I'd say stay with 70, because if you're up to 75 or down to 65, you're within some margin of error, which is probably just fine for what you're going to do. It's not that critical, but if you want to zero in, you definitely want to zero in on this value. The boil time is important because it determines how much water is going to boil off, right? So that's one of the values that you need to understand. The evaporation rate, this is also critical in conjunction with the boil time, because you'll get the combination of the two will determine how much water is evaporated away again and how much you need to add to compensate for it. So I put some suggested values in here now. One for the Blickman Brew Easy at a certain power setting, right? The Greenfather, the Spike 20-gallon gas kettle. For my usage, yours may vary depending on how much power you apply to the thing and how rapid you boil it. You'll have a different value, which is why you want to do this. I would suggest doing it with a pot of water before your first brew day on a new system, like I always do. I always add some water to the kettle, get it to the boil that I want the boil at. I'll just time it. I'll wait an hour and a half, whatever, and I'll measure how much dropped out of there, and I'll convert that to a value here. And so when I do brew on brew day, it'll at least be very close, if not the same. The water boil temperature, it's not 212 degrees, guys. Unless you're floating on a boat in the ocean, it's not 212 degrees. It's less, right? So at my elevation, it's 210.6. So that's why I enter it here. Hop absorption rate, this is a fudge factor. I still haven't locked this one down, so just beware. I'm trying to account for water losses due to hops absorbing your water. For a couple of ounces in a 10-gallon batch or 5-gallon batch, you're not going to notice it, but I've had some recipes where I add 6 ounces of hop pellets or more, and I've lost a fair amount of my final beer volume because of it. So I'm trying to account for that in here. All right, and we can go on down the line. Equipment parameters, how big is your mash tun? You enter that value in here. I got some suggested values for the equipment I have. You can actually override this and add your own suggested values to remind yourself in the future. This isn't set in stone. You can, if you've never used Excel before or don't know how to use it well, if you go into the data tab on the cell, you can go to data validation. But oh, look, it's grayed out. I'm all over the map here. There's a reason why. And I get a lot of questions about this. Larry, why do you have a password protected file? I don't have a password protected file. It's free. You guys can do whatever the hell you want to this thing. What I do though is I protect each of the tabs so I don't and you don't accidentally overwrite one of the cells that have a formula in them and then have a mistake on brew day and then blame me because my spreadsheet sucks, right? That's not the case at all. If you want to make a change, you on every tab you go up to unprotect sheet and you unprotect it. So now I can come down here and highlight a cell, go to data, and now see, now I can go to data validation, and I have an input message area here where you can enter in your own values. That's simple, right? Now for my own self, I always like to go ahead and lock that back up again. I like to go ahead and relock the tab when I'm done editing because I can make mistakes too. Some questions here, some comments. Do I squeeze grains or not? Well, that's for the, yeah, I guess you could do that, but that's for you. I guess that's true, but you can account for that here by changing the the grain absorption rate a little bit and account for that, I suppose, without having to do anything else. But yeah, I mean that's an interesting suggestion. Okay, so going back down to the equipment parameters, we have mash tun. How full do you want to fill it? Because you don't want to fill it to the very, very top, because when you try to stir things, it just sloshes out over the top, right? So what you want to do is give it a lower volume. So you put the actual max capacity or the actual size, the maximum fill limit that you're comfortable with. And now here's something, the sparge method. Now I added this, I think, since version 3 came out. So, because I started off as a batch brewer or a batch sparge brewer, and then I started doing some fly sparging, and then I started doing brew in the bag. Well, I started off with extract. I added that in as an afterthought, but depending on which method you use, it opens and closes certain parameters or applies certain parameters in here. So, for example, if I go to batch sparge, it didn't do anything here, but if I go to my recipe sheet, this was a different value. Now it says batch sparge, and it shows you how much water to add and how much work to drain out of your mash tun, right? So if I change this value to fly sparge, now it enables a flow sparge rate on here that I can enter in, all right, which wasn't available before. I go to the recipe sheet, and I have a fly sparge here, and it tells me how long it should take at that flow rate, right? Okay. If you go to do the brew in the bag, which I've been getting lots of questions on, it goes to the brew in the bag, and none of these parameters apply because, and I guess most of you all who do brew in the bag don't do any sparging whatsoever. You add your total water volume. So you'll see here that it changed this to brew in the bag with green, and it overrode and highlighted the total water required, implying that if you're a no sparge brewer, you want to add that entire amount of water to your system all at one time. Okay, now I left, for those of you who do brew in the bag who still want to sparge with brew in the bag, which I sometimes do still, I left the sparge water required on here and the original strike water. So you can do it either way with brew in the bag. You can put all your water in at once, or you can continue to follow the traditional parameters of a brew and get the best of both worlds with that system. So that's the answer to that question. Yes, it does brew in the bag, both kinds, sparge and no sparge. So, and then extract as well too. So I can go to extract, go to recipe tab, and it says extract, and it crosses out all these values basically because they no longer apply. You're not doing all grain brewing anymore at this point. All you're doing is skipping down to the pre-boil volumes and everything else. All right. Any questions on this? Take a look here. I'll answer some of these bigger questions at the end here. The Brew Easy is not a brew in a bag system, right? Well, it's not, right? Or is it? It's a hybrid. It's a 2-vessel, which is, it's like brew in a basket, but not. That's what I like about it. It's hard to describe in it. I have to think about that one for a minute because it's a little bit of everything, I think. Anyway, back to the spreadsheet. Let's see here. So back to the Brewhouse tab. So for today, let's say I want to do, well, okay, I've done a lot of batch spargings in the past. Maybe let's go for a vote. What recipe do we want to design? Batch sparge, fly sparge, brew in the bag, or extract? Go on. Type away. We'll see what we get here. I should get some fast responses here because I have my latency set to ultra low. I should be getting near real time comments here. Oh, okay, there we go. Batch, brew in a bag, brew in a bag, brew in a bag. Okay, that 3-to-1, 4-to-1. Oh wow, okay. I'll wait for another half dozen more responses here, and then I'll move on. But it sounds like we're moving towards brew in the bag. Fly sparge. Okay. Brew in the bag, fly, okay, 2 for fly, extract, okay, all right. That's real easy to do. We can cover that at the end if I have time. I have a 10:30 time limit, maybe 10:45, so another hour max here. Okay, batch, ah, man, what? This is so hard, guys, dang. Okay, I'll tell you what. Since brew in the bag is pretty straightforward, if I do the batch version and then do a quick redo with the brew in the bag option, I think I can satisfy both in the same amount of time. So let me start with batch sparge, and then when the recipe's done, and this might be a good exercise, I can show you how to convert someone else's recipe that may have done batch into a brew in the bag system on my spreadsheet for you to use here. So that might be educational as well, right? Okay, so I'll do batch, and then we'll come back around and I'll just change parameters for brew in the bag, and you'll see the results and the differences, and then we can tweak them to dial in to get the same outputs as the recipe that you used that was batch. So let's try that. So I'll go with batch. The size of your boil kettle, max fill, I mentioned that earlier. You don't want all the way to the top, it'll boil over, right? So even with a maximum fill for a boil kettle, 90% is still pretty high. You might want to do something like 80%. If you have a small kettle, right, it'll boil over quite easily. But that's up to you to decide. Dead spaces now. So we have a lauter ton dead space, which is basically if you're doing a mash lauter ton combo, like a cooler system with a manifold, that's a mash lauter ton, right? You're doing both in the same vessel. So so this dead space, is the amount of water or wort left in the vessel after you drain or rack out of it, right? So you can measure these quite easily, and this is what I do, and this is what I recommend to anyone doing anything on a new system for the first time or want to dial in their gravities again, right? If you've never done this before, you want to do a dry run. Start with water, so like you don't waste grain and beer and everything doing this, but you can actually add water to cover the drain valve. You don't have to fill the whole thing up, just enough to cover where it would start draining. You open your valve, you pump it out, drain it out, whatever you want to do, and what the volume that's left, you pour into a measuring vessel. Now I do have one here. Hold on a minute. So this might be a little overkill, but I have a milk jug here. I hope you can see this. Hold on, let me check my screen here. Milk jug here, where I've measured increments on this thing, and I have it calibrated for 68 degrees Fahrenheit on there, and I use this for that purpose. So yes, I'm that anal about it. You don't really need to be that anal, but water volume does change with temperature. So I would suggest staying with temperatures that are in the range of what you're going to have at the end of your measurement. But I would just add the water in there, drain it, take that water that's still sloshing around in the bottom of your vessel, and use a funnel or pour it into a bucket or something and measure it in something. A measuring cup, I use this. You can use a graduated cylinder. I've got one of those as well to get even more accuracy out of this thing. And that is your value now that you input into your dead spaces. So you got one for your mash lauter ton, you got one for your boil kettle, and I put some suggestions again in here for different systems that I have and that I've measured to get you started. But again, I showed you earlier how to change these pop-ups to do whatever you want them to show, right? Okay, and then something new. Oh, I got some comments over here. Just give me a moment. Let me take a look. A single vessel kettle. Yeah, okay. Well, that's all right. So that's what the trend is nowadays, right? Single vessel brewing is the thing. And really, is it really single vessel? Not really, right? Because where's your hot liquor tank water coming from? A lot of the times, right? The brew in the bag, you do it all in one vessel, but some people who do the fly sparging have a second vessel to add the water. So like, for example, the grain father, it's an all-in-one system. It's not all-in-one, right? It's mostly in one. It still needs another vessel to add the water in to like do the rinsing of the grains. So a lot of people may be using single vessel, but it's not truly single vessel for most of the systems. Some of them are, right? But yeah. All right, so going back here. So now something new I added. This is a new feature in, I think, 3.6 or 5. The type of chiller, right? So I added a pull down here. Immersion chillers, if you use them like I like to do, they displace the volume of wort in your kettle, throwing off your volume measurements, right? Now, I never had a way to do this before. In the past, I would have to cool my wort down to the same temperature I measured at before I started the boil, and then I had to take the chiller out and then measure everything, because everything has to be measured at the exact same temperature to make the volume measurements accurate. No more, as I said in this new version, that's no longer a requirement. I have in my recipe sheet, I have values here now where strike water volume. Now I have a field for strike water temperature, which I think I might have had before, but I added some more fields in here. Pre-boil volume, temperature, and volume. I think before I just had volume, right? So my formulas here will adjust and account for that temperature difference when you measure it. So you don't know. So you no longer have to measure the volumes at the same temperature, which is going to be a pain on brew day because you're like, no, and now it was cold when I measured it. Now it's hot. Now it's cold. Now it's hot. Now it's warm. Now you shouldn't have to matter. Just take your measurement, enter the measurement temperature the temperature at the time of measurement in there, and it'll correct for it. But going back to the chiller type, it also displaces volume. So if you have anything else, plate chiller, counterflow, this doesn't apply, right? So I can go to other, and it takes this value away. But if I add immersion chiller in here, it asks you, what's that displacement? So again, you fill your kettle with some water, enough to cover the immersion chiller, measure, take the immersion chiller out, measure, the difference is your displacement. So for my jaded chillers, I have in here, I got a couple of them actually, 2 quarts for jaded concentric Haida. So that's what I put in here. That's what I've been using a lot this year. And that, when it goes to the recipe tab, I have a field for this now, right down here. So you can do a post-boil volume measurement at whatever temperature you measured it at, and whatever volume you measure, and it'll correct for whatever input temperature you put in here. So if I put in 180, I think it should say, I could put it in here, I'll put it in a value, and it'll correct the volume based upon a standard that's been set. So it can compare apples to apples rather than apples to oranges. Okay, I hope we'll come back to that. All right. Got some more questions here. I'll have to come back because time's a ticking, guys. I got to get done here and then try to get back to some of your questions. All right, so I added that in there. It helps account for that volume discrepancy that I've had off and on over the years, because sometimes I'll forget and take the measurement with the chiller in, and that throws off my numbers, right? Unfortunate. Dead space for your fermenter, your calibration temperature for your hydrometers, correction factors. So I did a whole video on how to calibrate your hydrometer. Go check it out if you want. But these hydrometers are not accurate, especially the ones for home brewing. They're close enough. So if you're anal about being off by a few points and wondering why you're getting bad efficiency, maybe your hydrometer needs to be calibrated, and that's how you do it here. Work correction factor, that's for the refractometers. That's another field that you have to zero in on, and it can vary from batch to batch, which is why refractometers are not always the best either. There's always a war between hydrometers and refractometers, which ones to use. I've gone back and forth. They're useful in different scenarios. Each of them are. So it's a tough call, but that's not what I'm going to talk about here today. And then all the calculations. Okay, so fill this all out, take your measurements, get everything in there, and you're off to a great start. And then you can save this then you can save this file. I'm going to save this as, this is my personal brewing folder. I have a brewing archives folder, right, where I have all these old recipes in, right? Let me go up a level. But let's say I'm going to create a little folder here for my tutorial. And then I'm going to call this what beer do we want to brew? I don't know. I'll call it Larry's Brew, just for expediency. Okay, so now I save that as my template, right? And I can save it again and call it by a real recipe name and so on and so forth. All right, so now let's start doing the design of the actual recipe. Now, usually you go into the grains and you want to decide, well, I'm going to make a certain style. I want to pick my base malts. I want to add some extra malts for flavor, or whatever, right? I can come up in here and I can blank these out. Remember, everything in yellow is blankable. All right, so I'll blank all that out, right? So my brew house is set up to make a 10-gallon batch, I think. Now that I remember, I have a 10-gallon batch set up here, right? So 40 quarts is actually 10 gallons. That was my mistake. I think I said 5 before. So I'm doing a 10-gallon batch. And then I say, well, I need a base malt. Well, I usually use 2-row pale malt, right? So if I'm just doing a basic recipe and I don't have any particular need to do anything, I'll go ahead and pick not pale ale malt. I want to do pale malt. So you can pick the pull down and go through my list of malts. These malts are actually pulled from a malt tab. So if you want to go see what I've done there, you can scroll all the way to, scroll all the way to my grain and sugar tab. Now, the grain and sugar tab is where all the malt, it's the malt list, the grain lists, right? Where for everything. So I probably have a few hundred malts in here already, and I've never used them all. I kind of collected them and added them in here for you all to use too, and for myself at some point in the future if I decide to use some of these malts. But they have is the ingredient, the company, the type of grain. Is it a sugar or a grain, right? So if I'm doing extract brewing only, now that was a comment I saw, extract. If you're doing extract, you can filter on sugars and just get all the dry and liquid sugars, as well as actual sugars that you may want to add even as an all grain brewer, right? Or if you're just doing all grain and you don't care about sugars, you just add the grains and you get the grains in here. I just leave it alone. I just let everything show, and then you get the ingredients that come from the malt data sheets from the brewers. So over in column I source all my information from the websites of the maltsters. You can go there and find their malt data sheets and enter in that information like I did here. Again, you would have to unprotect the sheet, come down here, and you can change these values if they're wrong, or you think, or if you have a new recipe, you can add a row, put your new recipe, a new ingredient. You can add a row, put it in here, and give it the values, and it calculates the maximum points per gallon of grain, I think it is, the color, the diastatic power. All right, and so that's where this list is being pulled from. So if I protect this again and go back to my grain and sugars calcs, I picked 2-row malt. Let's do 20 pounds. Nice solid number, right? Now what I did here is this is going to be a very simple beer. I can add a couple specialty grains just for color or flavor or whatever. But what you see here is that it calculates the diastatic power, the maximum PPG, using your input for efficiency, which is why this is important to get that right in the Brewhouse tab. Estimates your pre-boil points, your post-boil points, and your color, right? So if you do enough of this, so let's pick a caramel malt, right? Because that's a popular one, right? Let's pick whatever. I'll pick caramel Munich 1. I'll put a couple pounds in there, and it changes the percentages of the ingredients. Now, there's rules of thumb, right? Some say for certain styles of beer, you want at least a 90% whatever type of grain, only less than 10% of a different type of grain. So this is kind of how you can do that quick math as well. And what it does is that it calculates your total diastatic power. Now it's one of the newer enhancements since version 3. And it'll tell you if it's green, it's got plenty of diastatic power. Now, diastatic power is the amount of enzyme activity, power the enzymes have in your malts to convert the starches to sugars during the mash. And certain grains have 0, like certain roasted malts. Like, so my caramel malt here has 0. So it brought the number down from what it was before, but the average is still good enough. The base malt will cover the other grains that don't have any. And just so it's something to be aware of, that you're in a good range. Don't be below, I think it says 30 on here, because it may not convert. Even if it's in the yellow range, it'll take you longer to convert. So if you usually mash for an hour, it might take you an hour and a half or more. It just takes longer, right? So we add some grains in here. Then we get the original gravity estimated, as well as the color. And they're green here because they meet the BJCP guidelines, which you can see over here. Actually, NA. Hold on just a second. Did we ever pick a style of a brew? I don't think we did. Aha! Let's just do a I don't know. Anything stand out to you guys? Let's just do. I mean, I'm not really going to actually make any of these. I mean, I'm just going to punch in a bunch of numbers here, probably. I did a Munich Dunkel last. Let's just do. I don't know. There's a whole bunch in here. I'll just do an American Pale Ale. That's what I'm most acquainted with, right? So now let's go back to the grain tab, and it tells me the color ranges. Okay, so now I have a red boxed SRM value, which means my color is out of the range of the guideline. Do you care? It's up to you. I don't really care about these guidelines, honestly, but if you're trying to reproduce an actual style, yeah, maybe you do. And the original gravity is in the range, so it's green, right? So I can go back and look at my recipe sheet and see it automatically populates the rows from the other tabs. It puts some values in here already. It's not finished yet because it hasn't finished fermenting, or I haven't added my yeast for the fermentation part of it, right? So I got some grains in here. You can go crazy as much as you want in here. I think I'm happy with this, but the color's out of range. I think it's low, I think it says, right? So let me add 4. Let me add 5 pounds. And still not there. All right, let's pick a darker malt, right? Let's pick a roasted malt. Let's go down to roasted malts. Let's pick. Actually, we're doing a pale ale. I wouldn't do that. That's not the right style. Let's go with. And I wish I should have put out a recipe that I know well. Let's see. I'll do Munich Malt 60, and I'll drop this down. There we go. So I'll put 2 pounds of 60 Lovibond caramel Munich malt into my recipe. It dropped the SRM, or put it right in the right range. Now I'm good on my OG. So let's move on. Questions here? Okay, Crystal 60. Thank you. Yep, that's what I ended up doing, but not. It's close enough. It's still 60 Lovibond. So now I got my grains. I got my original gravity in the range I want it to be in. I got my color in the range I want it to be in for the style I'm brewing, let's say, right? I can go to hop calcs now and start adding my hops in. So now if you save your template, which I didn't, I should have, but I'm kind of jumping all over the map here this morning. Let's say I didn't have anything in here. So now I say, okay, I have no bitterness in my beer. Well, let's say I have a hankering for, let's do some Azaka. I've used that before. I like that hop. And all I can find at the homebrew store are pellets. But if you have leaf, you can put leaf in here. Plugs aren't used anymore. I haven't seen plugs in like 15 years or more. Pellets are going here. And why this is important is because pellet hops tend to have more bitterness than leaf hops, because the leaf hops have more matter, leaves basically in them, and less oils. So I think you get probably about 10% more bitterness out of pellets, which is why I have these fudge factors up here in the upper right. So leaf is the baseline. If you're using pellets, it estimates a slightly higher bitterness from them. And these are yellow input fields. You can actually override these if you don't believe these values, or if you assume something else. That's fine with you. This is why Spreadsheet's here. And let's say I wanted to do a 60-minute or a first wort hop addition. All right, so I have a first wort hop factor, fudge factor, because that's kind of a fudge factor as well. I use 10% to say it's going to add 10% more bitterness to my beer. Again, that's not scientific. It's just a fudge factor I've been using over the years. The alpha acids, so you go to the store and they're like 4.5% alpha acids, let's say, and you want to put an ounce of hops in, and it'll tell you what the bitterness is here. It'll add 8.8 IBUs at a 60-minute or a first wort hop addition. Okay, that's great, but I wanted to now do some boil hops at 60 minutes, still pellets, still Azaka maybe, right? And there's still 4.5% because it's from the same batch. I add another ounce of hops in there, and now I'm up to I think that's a 16. My resolution's a little scaled down because I have to shrink my window so I can see the chat window at the same time. So that's my handicap here. But so let's say I wanted to add some bittering hops. I did that. Let's add some flavor hops. Maybe we just say that we're doing a smash beer almost. Basically, we're just doing a single hot beer, 4.5, and then another ounce there. This is a lot of hops, right? And let's do a hop stand, dry hop stand. Let's say we'll add some more hops in the last 5 minutes for some flavor and aroma. That's also 5.5. And we don't have that many IBUs here. So something tells me, even though as I go down the line, you'll see that the IBU contributions are lower and lower because the less time the stuff boils, the less bitterness you get out of these things. So let's say that I did like a hop stand even. You get a new value over here for the time. I think it's the time. I don't know why. I thought I had a name field come up, but apparently I must have lost that. I might have to go back and look at this. I thought it would ask you to input a time in there. It just turns on a value now. I must have lost some functionality over the versions. The hop stand, right? Now the hop stand didn't really add too much. It added a little bit, right? But let's go back to trying to improve the bitterness a bit. So I did some first word hopping. I added 60-minute hops. I get a lot of IBUs out of these. I might need to bump this up to 2 or 2.5 to get into the range for the beer style. So American Pale Ale, apparently I need to add at least 2.5 ounces of 60-minute boil hops to get there, along with these other additions, right? So you come up with whatever you want, your bitterness, your flavor, your aroma contributions. You put all that in here. It'll estimate the IBUs, tell you if you're in the range or not. And then when you go back to the recipe tab, it actually inputs them in here for you, right? Just like that. So you can go down the list, first word hops, 60 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes. And everything's in range still, right? So my original gravity, 1048, is in range of the guidelines. My IBUs at 34 are now in the range of the guidelines. My SRM is in the range of the guidelines. So I'm pretty happy now, let's say, with the hops and the grains, right? So let's go talk about the yeast, which is the next ingredient. See, because you can see that the final gravity and ABV are not shown. Why? Well, we don't know what they are because we haven't chosen the type of yeast that's going to be used. The type of yeast you choose is going to have an impact on that, right? If I go to the my mouse is skipping on me. Hold on here. If I go to the yeast tab, it's the same kind of list. Oh, and I missed the hops tab. I should have showed you this too. So there's one for hops, but going on to the yeast tab, it's the same as the other tabs. You can actually unprotect this. If you want to add more in here, you can add new rows. You can remove stuff. You can blank this all out if you want, largely, and have a short list of hops that you use. I don't recommend it because you never know when you're going to want to try a new ingredient, right? And now I have to go back and add it back in, but it's up to you. And so it gives you some examples of the type of a yeast. So if I want to get an idea, I can say I want only yeast from Lallemand. And it gives you a short list of what's in here from Lallemand. Oh, okay, yeah, I could do that, whatever. Or say that you don't care about the brand necessarily because your homebrew shop or online supplier has them all. But let's say that you want one that's that I only do dry yeast, right? So you can uncheck the L and get everything that's dry yeast. So looking at this tab is kind of nice for that aspect of it. So you can actually just get a big list all at one time and see what's there. So if you're going, what do I want to do for yeast? You can come here and look and compare and everything, and then come back to the recipe tab and come down here, and under yeast information you can pick the type of yeast you want. So let's say I wanted to do, since it's a pale ale, I'm going to just do an American Ale Y yeast 1056, right? So you punch it in here, it'll read the recommended fermentation range from that other tab, and it now, because it's got values associated with its flocculation and attenuation values, now it gives you an estimate of your final gravity here and an estimate of your ABV here, even before you start brewing, right? So that gives you in the ballpark, and they're in range here, right? So what if they weren't in range, right? I didn't show you that result. So let's go back and screw up the grain bill a little bit. If I go back to the grain bill and I change this quantity from 20 pounds to 30 pounds, it flagged as red down here because it's out of range. And if I go back to the recipe sheet, it bolded these values here just so they stand out, saying, hey, these are different and they're outside the range of the BG's whatever guidelines. You still use them if you want. It's homebrewing, do whatever you want, right? but just to let you know, since you picked pale ale up in the upper left, you're not meeting that category, right? So, okay, that's fine. I don't care. Just go ahead and let it ride, right? So I do all of that, and I have a pretty good base recipe here now, right? I got inputs for all my designs, parameters for brew day on the right side. Everything's filled in as to what I should be getting along the way. I got my shopping list here on the page, my order of boil additions. I got my recipe outputs. Everything you need to make this recipe is here now, right? This is so you can save this to a PDF file, print it on a hard copy, put it on a website, whatever you want to do. I prefer to keep the file intact because there are things that can happen on brew day, tweaks that you need to make at the last minute. You know, maybe you measure the value wrong. You can go back into some of these parameters and change them and get the updated value and watch it all cascade down the line and watch all the parameters update live, right? Without having to print out a new copy or go back to your office or whatever you do, right? All right, so now the thing I didn't talk about yet is water, right? So you can see here in the middle, I got water. These are parts per million. Now, this isn't my design. I actually borrowed, if you go over to the water tabs, there's two of them, one for English or US customary English and water for metric. Now, these are both from Easy Water. This is not my work. This is from Easy Water. They have their own website. In fact, if you use their tab, I have to probably be obliged to tell you they're asking for donations. If you use this part, and I am as well, right? I have a link on my recipe tab to give a PayPal donation for my time and effort on this, as well as what this place does too, right? Easy Water. So just pass it along. So in these tabs here now, but I did tailor them a little bit, right? So if you look here, you'll see that I got values automatically inputting into the weight field. So, okay, backing up. Easy Water. You start off at the top putting in your water values. Now, where did I get my values from, you might ask? Well, I didn't do it the right way. I actually just got a water report from the city of Chicago, from where my water comes from, Lake Michigan. And I started with this. And this is close enough. I don't know if it's how far off, if it's right or wrong. You could send out a sample of your tap water out for analysis, right? I didn't never do that. The water is fine. I don't have any concerns about my water, so I just go ahead with this. But there's a way to get these values. So you input them into the recipe sheet here. Go over to the water tab, depending upon the unit system that you used. They get pre-populated up here for you, right? As well as the water and the sparge water required. So that was broken up for you back here on the brew tab. There's values buried in here somewhere for those values. So those values get copied for you over to this tab, so you don't have to input them twice, right? And they're dynamic and they always update. Now, what I don't have automated is the type of grains to pick from, but I do automatically populate the weights. So I got 30 pounds. Remember, I changed it from 20 to 30 pounds for the base malt. But my base malt isn't base Munich, it's base 2-row. And these have an impact, and it's crystal malt, right? And then this is no grain. And I could punch in my value here for Lova bonds. And you may not notice it because my spreadsheet isn't large enough to show you all at the same time. But if I change these values, you'll notice that the value, the 5.67 in the mash pH area, changes a little bit, right? So I put in 0 there, put in 60, it tweaks it, right? So you want to keep that mash pH within a certain range or below to keep astringency and certain off flavors off, right? So what can you do about it? Well, you could change the grains you use. You can change your brewing water. You can use acids or other salts to raise or lower it a little bit. Now this spreadsheet does help you with some of that, right? So if I scroll down, you'll see that I already had previously entered 5 grams of gypsum for my previous recipe that I had on here. So if I put 0 in here, like it would be out of the box, you would see it's reporting 5.7 with 30 pounds of the base grain, 2 pounds of this caramel 60 Lovabond malt. It's above the 5.6 maximum threshold. What do I do about it? Well, try to lower it a little bit, right? So there's ways to do it. You can add acidulated malt here. If you buy some malt, you can punch in a value of maybe 3 ounces here. I dropped it. Maybe I'll put in 6 ounces, right? If you don't have acidulated malt, you can add lactic acid, which I do have here. So, what did I just do? I just hit enter and it bounced on me. So I put 10 milliliters, it dropped it, right? Or you can do it with water additions. So step 4A is to adjust pH down. So you can add some gypsum here. I'll put 10 grams here, whatever, right? And it dropped it. I don't know, whatever. I can play with these 3 fields and even split them up across the mash and the sparge water. So the reason why they do this is because you may want a certain pH in the mash, so you want to add a certain amount of minerals to it, but you don't really want to add it to the whole volume for whatever reason. Maybe you only are doing it to lower the pH, but you don't want. There may be reasons why you want to split it up. Really, for brewing the bag, doesn't matter. I mean, just throw it all in. So I usually uncheck these boxes if I'm doing brewing the bag, because I'm going to add it all to the brewing water right from the start anyway and not care, right? Scrolling down a little bit, if you come down here, it'll tell you the effects. So here's the original profile, and the mash, or did I do something wrong here? No, I didn't. I think if I had 0 here, yeah, here's the original. Here's some recommended ranges from John Palmer's book from a while back. If you guys have his book, it's probably what you can get that right out of his book. There's discussion and opinions and math and science behind whether that's good or not. That's not my place to tell you. I don't know that much about it either. But you can come in here and add in values in here to get into the ranges that you need for your beers. So there's ratios here. So you may want a balanced beer, you may want a hoppier beer, while at the same time trying to adjust things. So below 0.77 enhances bitterness. Okay, that's where I'm at. But if I add gypsum here, 10 things like gypsum, it makes it super low, super bitter. That's not good for that ratio, right? So maybe you want to add some calcium chloride to like balance that ratio, and it brings it back up again, and it changes the mash pH, and you get your new values here for your brewing water. You could spend a whole class on this. I mean, you spend a lot of time on this. That's not my intent here. I'm trying to get through how to use the spreadsheet, but I'm just showing you the effects of your inputs, at least to show you what you can do with this thing, right? So now I lowered the mash pH. I adjusted my my water profile. I raised up my calcium up, which for a pale ale, some calcium, a lot of calcium is generally pretty good, right? It gives it that crisper taste, more of a high calcium style pale ale. Why not, right? And so you can see in my water information, I have the ratios of 0.64 originally and my new adjusted one. And meanwhile, in my water additions, it told me it mapped over my 10 and 15 that I input on the other fields. So you're starting to see a pattern here, right? The recipe sheet is just a summary, mainly a summary tab of all the inputs you put in all these other tabs. With the exception of everything in yellow, everything that's not yellow is calculated for you from other tabs. Is this recording? Yes, Mike, this is recording. I actually have this recording on the live stream by YouTube, which will be this whole full length uncut thing. What I'm going to try to do, I'm also recording it locally, and if I can find time and cut out the dead space and try to shorten and simplify this a bit, maybe from its uncut length to a slightly shorter length, maybe I can try to do that. But yeah, it'll be rewatchable later, either in this existing unedited format or maybe in a second edited format. Okay, so there we are. That was the crash course of how to use my spreadsheet. I have a recipe I can brew with. One thing I wanted to do down here was, well, how carbonated do I want it? And I get a lot of questions on what do I set my PSI to? Well, it's not that simple. You need to know, for one, how cold your keg is going to be at the time of serving. So if your fridge is set for 35 degrees, 45 degrees, whatever it is, that's required information. You also need to know what they call the CO2 volume or the CO2 volume level, which is a temperature agnostic value. So down here in the CO2 volume tab, most American pale ales and lagers generally are around 2.5 volumes. If you don't know what that is, I also have another tab in here. If you go all the way to the end, carbonation tab here. I have, if you're doing bottling, this is something I haven't used in a while, but you can punch in your desired saturation and preferred volumes. It'll tell you how much sugars, if you're using pure sugar, corn sugar, dry malt extract for your batch priming for your bottles. It'll tell you how much to use here, right? There's 3 different methods, 3 different approximations. You choose one and go with it, and whatever you want to do. But what I wanted to show you was some of the typical carbonation levels. And here in this area over here, it won't let me highlight it for some reason. Anyway, but for American lagers, American ales, between 2.5 and 3, right? So I use 2.5 in my recipe sheet. And the temperature I want it to be at, well, my fridge is roughly 38 degrees. Enter that in, and it tells me what pressure to set my keg to get that desired amount of fizziness that I'm looking for. Now, if I'm doing like a lighter carbonated style, like a brown ale, I might go with like a 1.8, right? Or a 2, right? And I set my pressure lower, so it's a much milder carbonated beer. If I'm doing like a Weiss beer, I might do a 2.8 because I want it really fizzy and foamy, and raise the pressure to 14.4, right? So that's nice to have in there, right? And then any other ingredients. So if you're going to add a Whirlflock tablet, how many? I'm going to add 1 when at 15 minutes, and in my notation that means 15 minutes to the end of the boil. Use whatever notation you want, right? Or for you're going to add other add-ons like fruit, coriander, spices, whatever you're going to do, go ahead and add it in there. And then down in the notes section, let's say that, well, I have a steps mesh schedule. That was for my unit logger. But if I blank it out and say, don't worry, have a homebrew, right? Have a homebrew. I can't even type homebrew anymore. That's Charlie Papazian. It's slogan from his Joy of Brewing cookbook, Joy of Brewing homebrewing book, right? All right, so now this is my recipe. I am finished. I can now print this out, go brew, whatever I want to do, go shop. I can print this out, put it on my phone, email it to me on my phone. I can actually go to the homebrew shop and look at it. Oh, you guys don't have Azacca hops? So I go to my yeast tab or my hops tab, and I look for a suitable one, and I go, okay, do you guys have whatever? And okay, and it's a different alpha acid. Oh, don't worry, I have my AAUs listed here. I can do the quick math in my head or on a napkin or whatever, and come up with how much more or less of the hops I need to buy as a backup. All kinds of advantages to this spreadsheet, which is why I like it. Let's see some other things on here. Now we'll get into the actuals here too. So here you can actually then during brew day you take your measurements, right? So let's say I punch in all my values, and I'm an amazing guy. I come in here 163.2, my mash pH measured out. Yeah, everything's going gangbusters. I punch in 23 quarts for sparge water. All right, so now when I get to brew day and I'm doing batch sparge, I promised you earlier I would show you both, and I almost forgot. So we're doing batch sparging. And for my brewing house spreadsheet and the way I set up my inputs here, look at this, guys. Something else I didn't show you here before, but see how it says fail up here? My mash tun's going to fail. And it highlighted the mash tun value here. Well, that means it's over capacity. You remember when I went from 20 pounds to 30 pounds? I didn't check. Oh, it's a good check. I probably should put that's a good thing. I probably should put a copy of this over here in the grain tab so I can see that error right away. Wow, I just thought of a new enhancement, right? So anyway, I would have to lower this down to like maybe 25, go back and take a look. It's happy now, right? Both pass. Whew. So I know for the future, I need a bigger mash tun if I want to brew that big batch of beer again, right? So anyway, going back to the recipe sheet here. All right, so now my values changed. See, my strike water volume changed because the amount of grains were reduced. My grist ratio was 1.5, so that also got lowered accordingly. So now I have to come up here and input different values. So let's say I put in 41 quarts for strike water instead of 40.5. Let's say I put in 28 quarts of or 27. quarts of sparge water when it says 27.5. Now it's telling me to add and drain stuff here. Now, I've had a lot of questions over this as to what this means. And if you look at the Brewhouse Setup tab and scroll down to the calculations, I think it might explain it here a little bit. So in this area here for lautering, amount of water to add for the first step to get equal draining volumes. And then how much to drain and fill and drain again. So what this means in shorthand is the 0.79 quarts of adding to this thing is just, I mean, it's a rounding error now at this point. You might as well just not care too much. But the original intent of this spreadsheet was to divide the batch sparge into two steps, two drain steps, to maximize efficiency of getting the sugars out, the extract efficiency, right? That was to maximize that, because why not, right? You can ignore, I mean, 0.79 quarts, you can just make up for it by adding another 0.79 quarts to the next step, as long as your mash tun can hold the extra quart, right? You might be really close to the top. You need to be a judge of this. Me, I just follow it as is. I'll add the 0.8 quarts here, and then I'll drain it, and I'll get probably 27 quarts, let's say, out of here. That's what I measured. And then it says add 27.3 more. All right, so I add 27. Let's see, I added 27.5 because my measuring stick is only in half quart increments, and I'm like, yeah, that's good enough because I've had 4 beers and I don't feel like being accurate. I punched that in, right? And I gotta see what this. Okay, add drain. Oh, and then there's a third step here in case there's overflow. So I've had it in the past, and some of you had it in the past, where your mash tun was too small, even for a 2-step batch sparge, so you had to do 3 drain steps. So I added that in here. Now it says 0, which means there is none. But if you had a really high gravity or high density mash, a smaller mash vessel, you may be prompted to do a 3rd step of draining, which generally is not the best idea because you can get more astringency and harshness out of the grains by over sparging. So ideally you want 2 or less. That's what rule of thumb that I've been doing for 20 years. Not 20 years. I started doing all grain in the late 2000s, so probably like 15 years maybe. All right, so then you get down to your pre-boil volume. Now your pre-boil volume is going to be 100-something degrees. It's going to be about the same as your mash temperature. So 152 degrees is going to be what you're shooting for and taking your measurement at. But let's say I started the boil already. I'm draining it into the mash tun. I already got my boil blaring or my kettle blaring with the heat to get to a boil while it's still draining to save time. So by the time I take this measurement, it might be 165 degrees, let's say. Just speculating, right? And I take my measurement at 165 degrees, and that's odd. It's actually 55 quarts, not 54.6. Okay, well that's probably right, because the hotter wort is now a larger volume because it expanded a little bit, right? And that's what I'm trying to account for in this new version of the spreadsheet. So now you get to the boil volume. So right as it starts to get to a boil, it'll grow even more. As you can see, between the pre-boil 54.57 and the boil volume 55.53, it already jumped a whole quart just between 152 and 210 degrees. So, all right, so just following that same trend, I'll punch in 56 degrees here, or 56 quarts, and it tells me what my actual grain absorption ratio was. So it says, okay, you did a pretty good job. You put in 0.5 as your prediction. You actually got a little less. So now your wort is going to be a little more diluted, just a little bit more diluted. You know, you may want to boil it longer. Maybe you're happy with it. It's your judgment call, right? And it's something I've had here for a while. Which is your preferred measuring tool for gravity, refractometer or hydrometer? And I have fields for both in here. So if you don't know yet, and you take measurements for both, like I do a lot, because like I said before, there's pros and cons to doing a hydrometer reading versus a refractometer based upon your the time of the process that you're taking the measurement, as well as the color of the beer, because the refractometers are affected by the color of the light passing through the color of the beer. That can vary too, right, from batch to batch. There's reasons why you want to do hydrometer or whatever, but no matter, at this point in the process, you can take both measurements. So let's say I measured I take a hydrometer sample, pre-boil. It's almost 200 degrees. It's 165 degrees. It's not 60 degrees, which is what the hydrometer is calibrated for. Well, tell you what, throw it in the fridge for a little while, let it cool down to 100 degrees. You don't have to go all the way down to 60. So if I'm going to measure at 100 degrees, and I end up measuring 1065, that's probably a little high. It might be 1056 maybe. 100. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm overdoing this. It should be, see, again, I have to do it in an actual batch. But anyway, my mind's not going right here this morning. I need more coffee, and I'm not getting it right now. Anyway, so it'll correct, right? So, for example, if I type in 1052, and I actually was at my calibration temperature, I should get an adjusted value of 1052. But let's say if I measured at 70 degrees, it's going to measure at 1053. And actually, the hotter it is, the lower the reading will be, because the hotter the wort, the thinner the gravity, right? I would get a lower reading, which then makes sense. So I was backwards on my first example, but now I'm getting it right. But the point of this is that you can actually now take your hydrometer readings pretty much at any practical temperature. You know, I'd be a little wary over 100 degrees because these formulas and equations are usually like bound in certain ranges. I'm not sure what they are right now, but 100 degrees or low, I've not had any off estimates with this. So, or if you have a refractometer and you can measure it there, you can do it both, right? And you get the actual measured extract efficiency for both the hydrometer and your refractometer readings. So going forward, and for all the calculations on the outputs, it is kind of important to know which measurement you're going to ultimately use. And the one you ultimately use is the one that's bolded. So the refractometer is bolded in this case. The hydrometer value is bolded in this case. And you can go all the way down the line here, guys, to the point where you enter in your boil time. Actually, you know what? I'll just fill it all the way out. And there's something also something else here. You may be wondering why I broke this up like this. The pre-boil grains only and the pre-boil total. Well, some of you, including myself now, have recipes that are a combination of all grain and extract, right? Let's say that you're trying to do like a high gravity Scotch ale or something, or just you want to add honey to your recipe, right? So I broke this up because the first area, grains only, is your extract efficiency numbers from just doing the mash, and it gives you your extract efficiency to generate your exact amount of sugar that you got out of that process. And right now, and this next one is the total. So if I went back to the grain and sugar tab here, and I added a sugar in here, like let's say dry malt extract, right? Let's just say I wanted to add some Mutton's extra light, and I put like a half a pound in here or something for some reason, right? I can come back here and punch in that new value, and this new value is going to be higher, right? Let's say it's 1053, right? It's a little higher because I added sugar. So this area will only be the calcs for the all grain. This one will be the total after you add the sugar in and measure again. So you have a couple options to record data during steps along the way. Once post mash, once right before the boil starts with all the sugars added in. And then you come in here and say, oh, okay, now I'm my post volume with my immersion chiller. Okay, I just turned off my heat. I'm ready to start chilling. I say, okay, it's still at a 210 degree temperature, and I measure 49.5 quarts, and it adjusts it. Actually, no, I would measure more than that, right? Because my immersion chiller is 2 quarts heavy. So in practice, I would actually be measuring 51.5, because the immersion chiller, if you remember on the Brewhouse tab, I put in 2 quarts displacement, right? So I come back here again, and it accounts for it, right? Boom, boom. And I'm pretty close. It tells me what my actual boil off was for the hour and a half. So apparently I misjudged my boil off rate for some reason. I'm not sure why. I'm just entering numbers. It's not my real brew day, obviously, right? So I don't have a clue, but now I was wrong. So my original estimate of 5.4, okay, I overshot. My beer is going to be a little thinner than I designed. Okay, lesson learned. Next time, I'll take that 4.33 value that I actually got, go to my Brewhouse tab, and change it for my next beer. So I dial in. You converge on the solution of your recipes so that your actuals and your designs are closer and closer with each successive batch as you refine your numbers and get a history of your system, right? And then your original gravity, let's say I measured this one, I put my flask in the fridge this time, and I did get my 1061 value just to speed things along. I didn't take a refractometer value because I quit by this point. I said, I'm just going to go with my hydrometer. I don't care about refractometers anymore. I can do that too. How much went into the fermenter? At what temperature? Because again, temperature and volume are dependent variables. I want to record the temperature that the fermenter volume was at when I actually put it in there. So when it cools down to like 65 or 55 degrees, if I'm doing, let's say like a lager, I can account for that shrinkage as well. So I know how much I'm finally going to get ultimately in the bottles, right? And it tells what my hop absorption rate was. Just some math here. I'm not even sure if this is exactly right, but maybe 0.1 was not enough. Maybe I have to go back again to my Brewhouse tab and go to my hop absorption rate and bump it up something. I mean, if you think that 0.4 number it's throwing at you is wrong, well, use something else. Use 0.3 or something, and do the batch again. Brew another batch of a similar recipe with the same amount of hops and see what happens, right? And then you'll have like a historical record now that you can keep going back and say, okay, what was my average hop rate absorption for my last 5 beers? Okay, it was whatever. I'm going to use that value from now on, and it'll be closer and I'll have more predictable results. Okay, and then you punch in when your beer's all done and fermented out. You do a gravity check there, and you get your values. Your target batch size. Let's say I had more than I planned on because I had more beer or whatever, or less boil off. That's fine, whatever, right? And there we go. So now I'm all done. I can save this and put it in an archive folder somewhere. Put a date on it so I know when it was made, or I can put your date up here, right? I think I had a date up here before, so just like that. And that's it. So, ta-da. Time check, 10:25, 5 minutes ago. Thank you very much. So that's it. Now, I told you the variation about the brew in the bag, okay? Now, it's the same whole process, except this time it's just some things to be aware of. If I go back to my batch and my method, and I go to brew in the bag, I go back to recipe, it blanked out this whole area here. So really, these values here are not even needed anymore, right? And what you care about, now, let me do this again so you see the difference. I got batch sparge, total water required. It's in blue and not bolded. And this just says batch sparge. If I go to brew in the bag and go back, it tags it with a green background. It also tags this total water field up here and bolds it. So it's a visual cue. Hey, all this stuff over here is not so important anymore. If you're doing no sparge brew in the bag, which means you're throwing all the water in and you're recirculating and you're just draining the basket, you put that whole total water volume into your kettle along with all your grains, and you're done. I mean, that's that simple. You could even have done that even if this thing was tagged as batch, right? It's the same amount of water. You just ignore everything here. Just ignore it and just throw it in. So that's why I've said over the years, you can use my old versions of my spreadsheet with brew in the bag just fine, because if all you care about is the total water volume, you've had that all along. You just mix it in with the grains that are in there and you're done. Now, if you're trying to hit the mash temperature, you're going to have to play with that here, right? So you might have to do some fooling around with that, but if you're going to be heating the mash like in the vessel, like you do with like the Grain Father or the Spike Solo and stuff like that, you don't need to care about that really, right? But there you go, right? It's that simple. Extract brewing, or actually fly sparging, same idea. You can input a flow rate here, and this is just for record keeping sake, but you come back here and it'll tell you, it doesn't tell you to add or drain anything. It doesn't highlight the amount of water. You still follow the same steps as batch sparging, except when it comes time to sparging, if you told it that you want a 1 minute 1 quart per minute flow rate, it's just telling you how much time that should take, right? And so it says, oh no, it actually took me 45 minutes. I have to punch in some numbers here, but it'll tell you here in this little field here what your actual rate was. So it'll be like 0.7 quarts or something like that, right? I have to figure out which values I need to add to get in here, but I'm running out of time, guys. It's after 10:30. I'm trying to get to the end of this really quick, but it's not that hard. You can kind of see the theme here, right? I can go to extract. None of these values matter at all. You can skip the all grain, this grains only section entirely, and skip the extract because you're not using it, and go right down here, because from here below is all you care about now, right? So it's that simple. It's just these up here are all grain values. You're not doing all grain with extract. You're not measuring extract efficiency. You're not measuring the impact from the grains. All you're just doing is jumping right down to your pre-boiled volume. So you put your total amount of water up here, which is highlighted also in green, 69 quarts for my example. Throw it all in the kettle, dump all your extract in there, all your sugars in there, stir it all in real good, and take your reading. That's it. It's that simple. But so that's what I've been saying for those who've asked over the years, how do you use extract? How do you use brew in the bag? The information has always been there. It's just a matter of knowing how to play with the file or know where to look and where not to look, really. And that's my point about understanding the brewing process and why I got involved in writing my own spreadsheet, because I wanted to understand it a lot better, right? So that's it. If you have any questions, I can probably be here for like another 10 minutes at least, probably, I think, and answer some of these questions. I'm trying to think of anything else I might want to show you while you're typing in your questions now. Let me go over to some other tabs here that might be useful for you. I have a hydrometer testing and correction tab. So I remember I did that video about doing or calibrating your own hydrometers. Well, you can go ahead and follow that link there, which I think I have a separate spreadsheet for, or I might point you to this one, but here's where that is. So you can enter those values in here. It'll give you some information. It'll tell you, is it calibrated or not, and how much by how much, and whatever, right? I have a beer line length calculator here. So I did an older video now on how to prevent foam in your beer by balancing your draft system with a beer line long enough for your needs to keep the foam from filling up your glass. And this is that spreadsheet that I put into this one as a tab now, so it's all in one. You don't need to go download that separate spreadsheet. It's all here for you. Hey, Peter, hold on a minute. It's okay. You can come in you want. And I got here, I have my priming tabs and things and other stuff, and I showed you that already for doing bottling, some formulas on how to come up with your own values for what's in the grain and sugars list here, which are these values here. It's just a little bit of some equations, what if kind of things, but those formulas are actually embedded in this cell in this table here. And that is it. Let me think here. What else do I got? That's basically all it's a lot, right? It's a lot to show you all, but I hope that was useful for you. I can do more videos like this on specific topics if you'd like. I've had questions on how to scale recipes and adjust them. I kind of touched on some of that a little bit here. I've actually done separate videos about how to scale recipes and adjust them from other people's recipes. So if you guys want a live walkthrough of that, maybe we can do a different live stream on that topic. But if you have any topic ideas, let me know in the comments or an email or Facebook or whatever, right? And I think I'm going to wrap it up here again because I don't see anything I can answer at the moment anyway. I'm over time and I got somebody here waiting for me. And again, I hope that was enjoyable. If you like what you saw here and you find the spreadsheet useful, if you wouldn't mind, if you haven't already, throw me some money over at PayPal there for all the work I put into this. It's coming along nicely thanks to your feedback and enhancement requests. And I've actually done way more with this spreadsheet than I ever thought I would 10 years ago. So thank you for giving me that push. And thanks for tuning in. Thanks for hanging out on a Sunday morning. And I am out of here. All right. So you all take it easy. I'll talk to you later. Okay. See ya. Now I got to figure out how to log off of here.